I wanted to take a few minutes today to take a look at a topic I haven't talked about on this channel, but it is an RPG, and I guess I should say RPG series and RPG adjacent series because it has a lot of elements of other games. That's Mass Effect. Now, Mass Effect is probably one of the most iconic Western RPG series that I can think of, especially for mainstream. You know, like mainstream gaming, where you even have people who were not RPG fans getting into the games. It's almost a gateway to games like it. I think the shooter elements definitely helped with that, the sci-fi elements. I mean, it's got all that stuff in one package that Western audiences do eat up, especially compared to, I guess I would say, an Eastern audience. Now, that said, there have been some realities of the work on Mass Effect that have come out in the past couple of years that I did want to take a look at, particularly two articles. One of them is newer, regarding one of BioWare's co-founders speaking about working for EA and talking about working on Mass Effect as a series. And another one is just kind of taking a look back at what happened with Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, the reason that these things are applicable, I think, is it kind of goes to show some of the hurdles that go into making these games, some of the financial constraints. I think that a lot of the times what we look at is we look at the publisher as the bad guy because they front the bill and they're the ones who do put all of these constraints on a creative team. And then we look at the creatives, the artists, as the good guy. At least that's what I tend to do because I view these things as art. Now, that said, while I do still view it mostly that way, it's a very interesting and frustrating balance because it's like the artists, they don't have the money to sustain a lifestyle and, you know, create something this big without the publisher. So it's kind of this symbiotic relationship that sometimes works out extremely well, sometimes ends up blowing up in the face of everybody involved, kind of like the recent situation around WB Games I took a look at on my other channel, Degenerate J, which that channel is in the description down below, regarding shutting down Monolith Games, the Wonder Woman game, all this other stuff. Basically, there are a lot of times where games will never get off the ground, a lot of money will be spent and nothing will be made. There are a lot of games that a lot of money is spent and something mid or bad is made. And then there are situations like the original Mass Effect trilogy where money was spent, something good was made, but there were so many different hands tied on it, and especially tied when they got to the fourth game, that it ended up impacting the legacy of the series overall. So I do have a question of the day for you, which is, have you played Mass Effect, and if so, which is your favorite? I'm actually curious about that, and are you interested in the next one? Because I know Mass Effect Andromeda did kill that interest for some people. Now, all of that said, there was a recent interview with one of BioWare's co-founders, which is Greg Zeshuk. I think that's how you say his name, but I'm just gonna say Greg Z, who talked about EA and working for EA, because you have to remember EA Games, or EA in general, is above BioWare. They were above the people making the Mass Effect games, and also, obviously, you know, BioWare did make the original Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic game. Now, BioWare is pretty renowned for their RPG prowess, at least has been over the years, but when it comes to working for EA, Greg Z did point out some really big problems with it that did complicate things, especially for Mass Effect. Talking about it with Eurogamer, saying, "I like to comment that EA gives you enough rope to hang yourself." And what I mean by that is you have to learn to work within the structure. Now, this quote is actually going to play a little bit into what we're going to talk about with Mass Effect Andromeda and how that affected the series. But that said, when he was talking about the restrictions that they had in terms of the Mass Effect trilogy, he said, "I think we did quite well. If you look at the Mass Effect trilogy that came out of there, it was actually a pretty successful run. But you have to understand how to work within a big company." And for me, that was the end. It was like, oh, I don't like big companies. So I knew by year 2 that I was going to leave at some point. I just didn't know when. Though he did talk a little bit about having fun working there and some of the fun stuff that they did in this article and in some of the articles surrounding it, but also that essentially Microsoft and other companies had led to some of the problems that BioWare did have. Now, this is interesting as well because EA did actually lay off a bunch of BioWare workers, And they did say that essentially Dragon Age may or may not be dead as a series. It's kind of interesting because one of the former writers essentially said Dragon Age isn't dead because it's yours now. And a lot of the developers were fired and moved on and left, which is kind of, I guess if you're a big fan of Dragon Age, that's kind of a big deal. It's an aside to the BioWare comments on Mass Effect. But when it comes to Dragon Age, the Veilguard, there were a lot of problems with the game, from the writing being subpar, all the way down to it reportedly having been made as games as a service and a live service game, and then reworked into not being that later on. So it had development time that was wasted on these integrations into live service, and then wasted on pulling it out, and then writing that I think was kind of iffy in that game. Long story short, BioWare is not perfect. They have not had a perfect run, and a lot of the people who worked at BioWare when, say, the original Mass Effect or even Mass Effect 2 came out, I would argue probably aren't there anymore. Now, all of that said, Mass Effect in general has a very huge and storied history. It is something that is iconic for a reason, but when looking at Mass Effect 4, or Andromeda, which isn't really 4, but it was kind of this weird middle ground game after the trilogy, there was a whole article, what would you say, almost a bonanza. Like, they were going through, doing all these articles about the Mass Effect series over on the website The Gamer. They were talking to different people who worked on them, and I thought this article was interesting, which did talk about Mass Effect Andromeda and what happened with it. Essentially, it was starting to, like, this game was supposed to be the start of a new trilogy. But that said, because EA was cutting costs, because EA was trying to do all this stuff, they were focusing on their sports games, they were focusing on live service, they were focusing on all these things. And we even see that with Dead Space, where Dead Space got a remake, but it didn't sell well enough, so supposedly the series is dead again. Like, EA is very, very money hungry and money pinching in general. They were basically tying the hands of game developers on Mass Effect Andromeda, which I thought was fascinating to read about. It's something I didn't know, but this quote from the one article was very interesting to me, saying we were only given the budget for 2 new species plus the Remnant. Not to mention that we couldn't even include all of the Milky Way species, and we weren't going to be able to let you travel throughout the galaxy. This meant that we had to develop the story around some pretty glaring inorganic limitations. So not only did you get something that felt and was much smaller than what you got before, almost everyone playing the game probably had something that they really liked about Mass Effect that just wasn't there. So essentially, they were given these rules and these limitations from EA. They were given these rules because they were trying to limit what these different games could do and limit the budget on them to milk out as much as possible. And I think that EA in general has really been ruined by sports. They were really ruined by all of these different things where it's like you could milk it to sell trading card packs essentially digitally, or you could milk it to get people to buy almost the same game every year. And so because of that, EA, which actually has produced at a production level some very fascinating and great games over the years, they have now whittled it down to where they're working on very few series, plus Battlefield and sports. And this is something I'm noticing more and more, is this whittling down of what is experimental and interesting and makes your companies stand out and makes them unique. Whittling that away to where you're just kind of a shell of your former self, and all you do is put out the product. You're not putting out art anymore, you're just putting out products. I think unfortunately the way EA has gone, it has gone so corporate that even with things like Mass Effect Andromeda, they were really kind of kneecapped by that company. And it makes me wonder, reading this and looking at these stories of how developers have described working under EA, almost like working at the gulag. It's like you've got guards looking over your shoulder at all times, like, hey, are you wasting 25 cents on this? What's going on? The CEO wants a raise. What are you doing? When I look at this, it makes me wonder about their other commercial failures, and I put that in quotations because they'd be successes for other companies, like Dead Space. How much of that was EA's fault? And how many people are being punished for it because of EA? That's kind of what I wonder looking at this, and I found it a fascinating look at a beloved RPG series behind the scenes, Maybe we'll do this again with more commentary from developers or something like that. But I think it's unfortunate to see that EA is sitting on these different gold mines, at least of art. You know, I can't guarantee that they're super high sales all the time, and that's what they care about. They don't care about the art side of it. But they're sitting on these gold mines of these things, of creativity, and then they tie the hands of the people making them behind their backs and say, now do a good job. It kind of makes me wonder what they think they're gonna get. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, I appreciate that very much. I do have an Amazon affiliate link, which is down there in the description. I have a list of RPG gamer essentials. If you enjoy RPGs like me, maybe you want to check that out, along with all kinds of other stuff. We have a Fortnite code, and we do have our own store, cosmobunny.shop, where we sell coasters, keychains, trays, and more from recycled paper, comic books, manga, magazines, inserts, more. All of these things are basically turned into these resin pieces because those comics, manga, all those things are damaged. They're not able to be sold by local stores. We take them, we transform them into transformative art into a new medium, and then we recycle the rest and keep it out of landfills. So we appreciate you. Hope you check that out. Have a fantastic day. And as always, everyone, stay shui.